tell me good afternoon in whatever language that is. Buenas tardes. Come on. Konnichiwa. Portuguese. Wow, okay. Excellent, excellent. And the reason I'm asking is because this panel is all about multilingual WordPress websites. And I would like to introduce the panel moderator, Stéphane Boisvert.
Thank you for the warm introduction. I'll start by introducing or having my panelists introduce themselves. Here we have Pat.
My name is Patrick Wancia. So contextually, I'm separate to that of Trevor and Stefan here. I'm not a developer, but as a byproduct of wanting to realize very specific functionalities and design for my company's websites, I was relentlessly thrown into working alongside of developers to realize those things. And we were introduced to our first site was a custom HTML website that was built back in 2003. And our agency at that time had introduced me, I think it was in 2005, to an early iteration of WordPress, because we wanted to solve the problem of ease of content introductions, and also the replication of content across different sections of the site. At that point, we didn't feel it was stable enough, so we continued to work with our HTML site and just updating every single page and every single sidebar forever and ever and ever. And then at one point, we just decided to take the leap and jump into the world of WordPress. Initially, we worked with a lot of custom development, and we still weren't really very happy. So we started to learn a bit of code ourselves, and Asha will explain to you how she stepped into that picture in a second. And now we've put together a bunch of very well-coded WordPress plugins to work together in a very effective way, but I would say somewhat non-conventionally. So that's a little bit about me. Yeah.
Perfect. Asha, could you introduce yourself?
Yes, so we work with Patrick, and as he mentioned, we did have to come up with a pretty complex setup for our own business, and we had to handle mainly English and Japanese. And Japanese is, it's very different from English, so there are some additional complexities associated with trying to have a bilingual website with the Japanese language. And our website was very interactive. There was a lot of functions. There was e-commerce, e-learning, and user interacting with each other, messaging, commenting, and so on. And it turned out there were no simple solutions, to address all that complexity. So it took us quite a while to figure out something that worked for us. And so currently, apart from we have achieved a quite stable solution for ourselves, and we are consulting some other people who are having similar problems with their multilingual development. And also another perspective that I am also a translator, and for me to see badly translated text, it's just painful. And also just from the customer perspective, when I think about somebody who receives, a message in a wrong language, or it's half translated and it's so obvious that it's just machine translation, I understand that they're emotionally, they feel like, their second language, it's anyway, it's not very good. So of course we're constantly trying to find better solutions to make our customers and users happier when they interact with our websites. Yeah, that's
just so contextually, we lived in Japan for a very long time. So based in Japan for 30 years. So all of our websites were developed in both Japanese and English. And we'll talk about it a little bit later, but contextually, it's not just about the translation of content. It's also about the contextual understanding of that. We'll hit on some of those points later. And yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Trevor,
sure.
Please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name's Trevor Mills. I'm a back-end developer. I'm based out of Barrie, Ontario. I've spent the last 7 years working at an agency out of London, Ontario called TBK Creative, and we have delivered a whole bunch of mostly WordPress sites, and a lot of them needing to be multilingual. So I have a lot of experience with that at sort of an enterprise level, and a lot of experience making the translation plugins do things that they don't want to do, but I want them to do them.
Thank you, Trevor. Now, I want everyone to take out their phone and go to slido.com right here and to enter the code. So everyone take out your phone, because this is going to be interactive, and we're going to be answering the questions from you, the audience. You can put them in any language, and as long as you are able to type it in that language and you're able to translate it yourself, we will answer it. I know, I'm sorry. So, I don't think that's a good idea. So while everyone is typing that, I'm going to give the context of the first question. So all of you have probably worked with clients either as a developer, as a consultant, for your own sites. How do you go about really anticipating and understanding the client's needs and understanding what they want to achieve in terms of multilingual? So I'll start with Asha.
Okay. Well, I think it's very important to understand that when people think about multilingual solutions for WordPress, they very often think about having a single plugin which is going to solve all their needs, right? And
that's the hope.
And also it's also very easy to just kind of fall, into that type of thinking and then just think that you just need to find the right plugin. But very often the client will not anticipate the issues that may arise in certain functions that the plugin may not be able to handle. So it's very important to ask a lot of questions. So of course, for example, how many languages, what kind of languages, because for example, automatic translation will work well for some pairs, but not other pairs. Apart from questions like that, you really need to understand their business, what exactly they're going to be using their website for and how big is their team, what is, for example, what are the languages that the team speaks, who is going to be editing the website. And so there's just so many questions that you need to ask far beyond what you're actually going to be working on. And so sometimes it's, of course, well, we'll be talking about maybe WPML and all the other, what we call solutions, right? Multilingual solutions. But apart from that, you may have to have some other plugins which will handle some functions related to this multilingual interaction. Yeah, so it's in a way, so it's a package of solutions rather than one solution.
Yeah. And doing a sort of discovery and deep dive into what the clients need. Trevor, from a technical perspective, what do you do?
Yeah, so when I'm talking to a client, and we saw this a whole lot, a couple of things were a real regular pattern with it. The pattern was that the multilingual stuff was left to the end. I don't know if you guys have experienced that, but all along they've been saying we need our site to be multilingual, and then we end up coding the multilingual stuff the week before we're supposed to go live. Time and time this happened again, and time it went over budget. Not surprisingly, we're in the last minute. A whole bunch of unknowns and gotchas come up when you get into translating the entire site. It's very hard to predict. And it really eats up time. So I think that it's really important to set the client's expectation that when we get to translation, we need to give it more time than we think. There's a bit of a caveat to that, I think, which is that you want to ask the client what their tolerance for okay translation is. Yeah. Are you a fairly static website where it's just important that you have a French version, but it's not critical that it's perfect everywhere? That can influence which decisions you might use for the software. Whereas if you are a mission-critical site with a lot of active content that's coming in, aggregating it from a whole bunch of different places, how are you going to deal with that? So my advice would be that when you're dealing with a client, you want to have that multilingual conversation go deep early so that you understand what it is that the client's looking for, and try not to leave the development of it and the content of it until the last minute, because there will definitely be gotchas.
Thank you. So I'm seeing some questions come in. You can also upvote the questions. So we're going to move on to our next question. Oh, I don't think I can do that here, maybe. So to what are the pros and cons of some of the solutions? So before I really jump into that, right, I think I want to set the stage. I think you have all talked a bit about some of the questions you've asked, right? And I think all of these solutions or package of solutions have trade-offs, have pros and cons, right? Trevor, you were talking about, like, is it okay for this translation to be acceptable, right? I remember when I worked in government or in politics, if the translation is not perfect and is not there at the same time, that's a big no-no, right? And so that's some of the context, right? And I think sometimes we need to think about, is it like a culturally different? Is it region? Like, is it regional? Are you doing like a site for Europe and one site for Canada? Are you doing many sites that are all in Europe in different languages? Do you have in-house translators? Do you have like brand guidelines that you need to adhere to? Does the content do a lot of interactions? Do you have a store? Do you have different inventory per region? Do you have the same inventory, different regionalizing pricing, right? And so with all of these thoughts in mind, Trevor, can you talk a bit about like WPML and your thoughts on the pros and the cons of it?
For sure. Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I would call WPML is kind of the go-to. It's kind of the ubiquitous solution that developers go to first. I think that is probably true. I also know that as a developer, it's a very difficult piece of software to work with. It is not built in a way that's extendable and not built in a way where you can do the custom things that you need to do with it. WPML is a very, very bloated plugin. It does everything. And there's no other solutions, I think, out there that do everything quite in the way that WPML does. It does do automatic translation. It does translation management. It will give you a management interface to translate the strings on your plugins, on your themes, custom work that you're doing. It gives you that. Gives you workflow for what the translation is supposed to be, approval process, nice editor, decent editor anyway. On the surface, it's fine.
Sounds like it does everything.
Sounds like it does everything. As a developer working with it, who has worked with WPML as a developer trying to hook into hooks? Who agrees with me that it's crazy to work with that thing? I don't understand what they're doing with their abstractions and their choices and all that. I feel like I want to tell a little story about.
Do keep it short.
Yeah, right. Okay, I'll keep it short. So we had this an enterprise client. They had careers, and they were scraping careers from a whole bunch of different ATSs, and they want those careers to be on their website, and they want them to be in French and English. And it's critical that they government regulation says that both of those must go live at the same time. And what we learned in the process, what I learned in the process, is that some of the original source careers were actually in French, not in English. So what I learned when I tried to do the automatic translation of the French posts is that WPML will not automatically translate from the secondary language to the primary language. They will not. There's a thread on their support forum that says we won't do it, but we've added this little tooltip on the box to help you out and let you know that we don't do it. The solution that we ended up coming up with, and I'd say that for devs who are out there who are getting requests for custom workflows, you got to be prepared to dig in on stuff like this. What we ended up doing is when we're importing the careers, we detect language. If the language is French, which is our secondary language, we set up a workflow to import that language into a different child site of the multi-site, the child site where the French is the primary language. We kick off the automatic translation on that, and when it comes back, we say, well, okay, that's the French site. Now I got to put it into the English site, and I got to put them both live at the exact same time. And that isn't going to be done with any point-and-click stuff. You got to get into code for doing that, and I'm just going to tell you, it was not friendly. I tried doing WP Switch blog to be able to do the translation, but where WPML sets up the jobs is in the shutdown hook, by which point I've changed back to the original blog, and so it tries, like, it was crazy to do it, and I don't feel smarter for having figured it out.
So thank you for talking about that. We actually have a couple of other solutions from people in the crowd, actually, who've helped us yesterday. And so I'm going to talk about one of them right here. So this is Fluency. And you'll see here, and what's really interesting here is that everything is actually machine translated. And all you do is you just download the plugin, you get one free language, which is why you can go in the plugin directory for free. And then you can just do the translations automatically and you don't touch anything. So this is really useful if you don't know how to speak the other language, you don't actually have anyone on staff, but you just want that to be available in the other language. And also, usually, like, in a sense, it needs to not matter if the translation is great, right? Because if you were to do that in like a regulated sector or agency or for the government or something, you know, someone would be frustrated and would be angry that you translated something slightly incorrectly, right? And you can't edit it, right? But it's a really interesting solution, and my laptop's internet died. This is not the video's fault. But I thought this was really interesting as a way for someone who just wants it in a different language, right? Just like, it doesn't matter, right? Like what I want is very different, right?
And not to overly endorse, but if anybody wants to talk about Fluency, there's your man right there.
Yes,
Matthias.
there you go. There you go. We did not even get bribed. Maybe later, hopefully. We'll see. Now, having talked about that, let's go.
You know what, Stefan, I want to just, before we get too far on that, I think maybe developers are interested in what the differences of the technical implementations of these
For this
different
one?
yeah, and of the different solutions.
Yes, that's a very good question. So, talk to us technically about WPML.
Yeah, sure. So how WPML works is you've got your English post here. It will create another post in the posts table for the French. The way that the association is made is that there are a couple of custom tables within that WPML adds. One of them creates a translation, and then the other one says that for this translation, this post is the English one, and this post is the French one, etc. That's how it's working. So it's duplicating content. Same with terms, taxonomies, and that sort of stuff. Whereas Fluency...
Yeah, you just basically install the plugin, and it does it all with Magic AI.
Yep. It's doing that, and it's
storing everything, I think, just in the caching layer in transients.
Yep.
So then, now the challenge is, as of now, from what I understand, you can't edit it. I think that's a requested feature. Yep. But this is really, it's a very different technical implementation.
Yeah, and I think I've got it right. So when the page is requested, there is a hook at the end of the page render that grabs that content, hashes it, and then translates the content of that, stores the translation in a transient. And the next time that page is requested, it serves from the transient as opposed to from the...
and it supports, I believe, blocks and classic editor and basically all the hooks and the filters to go through that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So there's another way of solutioning it, and I think that's like the Weglot solution. And Asha, I don't know if you can speak to us a bit about that.
Yes, Weglot is actually a little bit similar, I guess, to Fluency. I only learned about Fluency yesterday.
Yeah.
But
it uses DNS, I believe. Is that correct?
It also captures the page, sends it to Weglot server. There it gets translated and then sends it back.
Okay.
The difference from Fluency will be that it stores all your translations at the Weglot server. So, for example, if you stop paying for the subscription, you lose all your translations. But it does allow you to edit something. So it immediately will translate the entire website. And mostly the translation is all right. But if you don't like something, you can tweak it. So it's actually, we did work with Weglot a lot. And I think it's a great plugin for many people. But it really depends on what the website is doing, and the reason why ultimately it didn't work for us and we switched back to WPML was because our site was too dynamic. And in Weglot also, their pricing plan is that you have to pay per word. So, for example, if you have users interacting, you know, a comment was posted 1 second ago, 2 seconds ago, 3 seconds ago, 4 seconds ago. You're paying for all that, right? And also you're paying for, you know, your order number 1001 is complete, your order number 1002 is complete. All that is considered different strings. There are ways to exclude content from translation using CSS classes and so on. But for example, when you're trying to exclude numbers and dates from an order, you know, information, it just takes you 1 hour to find a way, you know, to exclude like the third of a kind, you know, span class inside this class. Is just such tedious work. And also it automatically will translate all the user messages, you know, which has privacy implications. So, you know,
That can be concerning depending
yeah, exactly.
on the...
But of course, it's possible to somehow exclude it from translation.
Right.
If you cannot figure it out, you can reach out to support and so on. But actually, if you have a complex interactive site, it takes a lot of time to set it up in such a way that fits your needs, you know, and all the regulations and so on. And also another problem that, for example, let's say if I want to connect with a user using a social function, and I send them a connect request in my language, and they are a speaker of another language. They receive the message with this request to connect in my language and not in their language, right? So for example, if they're a Chinese speaker, I will receive something in Chinese and I have no idea, did they accept my connection, rejected my connection? So it's very confusing, and somehow those, there are no mechanisms existing to control, you know, like when we have two users interacting, to decide which language should be used in which situation. Yeah.
I think it's one of those, it's very simple to get started, and it's very simple to go like to 80%, but then getting that last 20% is nearly impossible.
If you need those functions, because
many
if you
websites
don't need that.
Exactly. Yeah, that's probably similarly to Fluency, right? If this is what you need, then that's great. If you need more, then you need to go in another solution like WPML. And the next one that I'll present, which is Multilingual Press, actually. And so this here is the Swiss Info channel. So I believe this is the CBC, which is a Canadian broadcasting company of Switzerland. And the fun thing with Switzerland is they have, I think, 5 national languages, and their site is, they have 4, and they have 10 languages on this site. And they have users who are looking at content in these 10 languages and that are commenting in the 10 languages. And so this is a multi-site sort of implementation, right? And this, for example, is just showing us how they handle content that is being written by an English viewer. And you're seeing here, it shows up as a content on the English site. And now they're going into the back end, they're seeing this content, and they're approving it, they're approving the English version, and this was an English answer to a German question. And then here, when you're in German, you can see, and I don't stock German, but I'm pretty sure that means that this comment was automatically translated from English, and they can see the original under it, right? And this is handled, oh, and there you go, we can see the different versions of the page. Let me see if I can just pause on that so that we can just see how this works. Boom. So you can see it was actually originally in German. And this is something really interesting because for me, if something was originally written in French, I want to read it in French. If it was originally written in English, I want to read it in English, right? And this is something really interesting that I think applies in very different parts of the world, right? And so I believe this is like multilingual press. It's different multi-sites. And it's a really interesting use case of the machine translation and of having something that fits in that cultural context, which is Switzerland.
So does it detect the language of the comment rather than the language that the browser said?
I have no idea. I didn't implement this. But I know who we can ask after. It's the guy in the green shirt. Perfect. So now that we've pivoted on multilingual press, I believe there's other ways of doing things, such as having taxonomies that are shadow taxonomies that link content, such as French and English. Trevor, do you want to talk to that a bit?
Yeah, I can. I know that's been done. Did we figure out?
We did not figure out which plugin.
Yeah, all of us have this memory that there's a plugin that does the translation association via taxonomy, but none of us could remember which one it was. Does that ring a bell for anybody out there?
Is it Polylang? Is it Vanmo? Maybe from Code for the People. Not 100% sure. So anyway, but that's another way that you can manage translations is using taxonomies, right? And then there's this other way, and I don't know, Pat or Trevor, if you want to speak to this, of using sort of like just using Google Translate.
I mean, Trevor used, I think, just a straight Google Translate plugin on a site that he built. I'll let him explain that in a second. I used another plugin called G-Translate at one point to build a separate site. And G-Translate, the free version off the shelf, it looks pretty clean. It'll do the machine-based translation, and you can have a language switcher. And if you want to go in and tweak the translation content, you'd have to pay for the pro version.
Yeah, and I can speak to. Can you even bring that up on your computer?
Which one?
The big yellow bus, my big yellow bus.
It's in the WhatsApp.
.ca. So
I'm just gonna try to. So it's my big
yellowbus.ca.
What could go wrong?
Right.
I'm
Live.
just gonna, okay, .ca.
There we
There we
are.
go. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, this could end poorly.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm here.
This was a really good example of it not being critical that the translations were perfect. What this is a website that talks about bus delays for schools. So the chances of various language speakers being there is high, and the solution that we ended up putting in on this was just the Google Translate dropdown, which is right there. We did do a little bit of styling, so at least it kind of looked like our site. And then all this is doing live translation of the content via Google Translate. Now, when I tell you that using WPML bloats hours and goes over budget, let me tell you, this took about an hour to implement. And that was it. And we haven't had a problem with it since, and there's been 0 complaints on it. So, if you got that use case and you don't need the full control over the translations, that the sort of 90% or 85% is good enough, the Google Translate, Live Translate is a decent solution to think about.
Yeah, and essentially the G-Translate will do the same thing as that. You can have more control over the styling, the language switcher, and you could pay for the pro version and go in and tweak the translations if you want to.
And so G-Translate, I would imagine, is probably storing the translated content in the database somewhere.
Yes.
Is that right?
So, yeah, I believe so, yeah.
And this one does not, right? Like this is it's all translation
Google, yeah.
live on front end. So you don't get your own URL for the different languages. All that sort of stuff. You don't get some of those features that maybe you're looking for. But boy, if you just need the stuff translated and you want it quick, that's the fastest solution I've ever done.
But then it also doesn't get indexed, right?
Okay. So next question here, and this one's going to be a fun one. It is, will we ever see full multilingual support built into Core? Does anyone want to tackle this?
Somebody was just talking about that.
Yes. Someone was talking. They were probably the ones who put this in.
In the very near future, yeah. And it was
you mean, yes, there will be a presentation tomorrow on the state of multilingual support by someone in a green shirt.
And we're all going to be so informed that we'll be able to heckle.
Yeah, but I think we will get an update on this, but I think this may just be our speculation on this.
Well, I mean, the thing about that, and you answered it very well just outside before, is that if that is going to be integrated into the WordPress core, which is a very, opportunistic way to look at things, you brought up the analogy of Gutenberg, right? So, Gutenberg was implemented, it's still not quite yet at what it should be for a page builder, and how can we utilize it in a way that we can utilize bricks or, any number of other page builders in that same way.
Yeah, and I think the point I was trying to make is that at least for a while, Core will not solve every one of these issues. There's so many things, Asha, that you bring up in terms of what needs to be done in terms for the client, that I don't think core will be able to solve all of those, at least initially. Much like Gutenberg, when it came in, did not solve the page building problem for everyone, did not solve all of this, right? But has grown over time.
I think it's from the perspective of a user who uses the website and also an admin on the website. Obviously, there is a very big difference between the shell of the website and the content of the website. And for example, comparing WPML and solutions like Wiglot or Fluency, all these Google plugins, they don't duplicate the page, which is content essentially, right? But they just provide you with a translation, and well, they don't store it anywhere or just store it in some other way without duplicating the content. So those two are very different approaches to handling translation. So for example, if we were to think how it would work if it was built into the core, either it has to go in one direction or another, or there should be both options, which I don't know how it's going to develop. But for example, if the shell could be translated more reliably, that would just solve so many problems, because so many people, they would prefer to have the interface fully translated, and then the content. For example, in certain cases, when you sell the content, you don't need to have your content in two languages, right? You sell something in English, right? And you sell something in French, and you sell something in something else. And for many users, it wouldn't even make sense. They only speak one language. Why would they even need to switch, to something else? So there is no need to bloat your site with that.
When you talk about that, you're thinking a bit about like selling content in terms of like gated content, learning material. Is that?
Yeah, something like that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And
right, where you won't buy the same book twice, let's say, once in English, once in French.
Right, yes, and selling the same book into languages, like how much, effort goes into translating a book, right? You don't want to just like add a switcher. That's a little bit strange. But I think that to see the WordPress plugins, interfaces, be much more easily translatable, I think that should happen soon, because there is a big demand for that.
I mean, Jesus, if it was at the WordPress core, it'd be awesome. Like, if it was able to be implemented at that level, why not?
To be honest, I was surprised to see the full multilingual on the roadmap for core.
Why is that?
Because I was surprised it didn't feel like a sort of a core issue to me. I think maybe because of the thing that I don't think translation is like a major use case on a lot of sites. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm wrong. I guess a lot.
I think
more
it really depends which part of the world.
I suppose maybe you're
Yes.
right. Yeah, but yeah, to see it into core, to put the functionality of being able to manage multiple languages in core, it surprised me. It didn't seem to align with what I thought core was going for. I would love to see it. I wonder if they're reacting to the other solutions that are out there in a certain dissatisfaction. I don't know. I'm curious.
I'm not sure. My assumption would be just growing beyond the single language, the Western English sort of thing, into so many other countries where it is very prominent, right?
Yeah, and I guess WordPress creating that as an offering probably is going to be something that sets it apart from other things. Like Wix doesn't do that,
Well, and also because currently the automated translation quality has really improved, and with AI you have really good quality output instantly, right?
Yep.
A few years ago, I think thinking about having fully multilingual sites, you would still have that question, okay, what do we do with the translation? Who's going to do the translation? But now...
And the cost.
Yes, and the cost.
And the manual
but
input,
now,
the labor. Yeah.
Exactly. But now that the second step is solved, essentially, right? It just, why not, make the first step? Because it will help so many people.
So here's a question, and I think we addressed it a bit in our other questions, but, oh wait, no, the questions changed in order. So I'm gonna skip to the second one here, which is just, What should we do when a client wants a multilingual site but are unable to translate and localize their content due to limited resources? I think we briefly touched on it. So if you just want to, if there's something other quick tips or something that you have, so we can just check off that question. We have, I guess, the plugins like Weglot, Fluency, the G-Translate, just putting a Google button on there. I think that's the easy solution for this. Anything else to add?
Well, but sometimes also you just need to explain to the client that sometimes what they want will cost.
Right, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so next is, can you share some accessibility challenge that you may have experienced when developing multilingual sites? Patrick, do you want to start?
Accessibility challenges. In relation to...
Screen readers, in relation to maybe color, font, hieroglyphics.
Yeah, so, I mean, the only way that I could really see that working from what we've been building out is to use something like WPML, and then you would build that into somehow the accessibility aspects of the CSS that you're developing on top of that. So
something that gives you a lot of really narrow technical...
Granular control.
Yeah, really granular control.
Which is achievable, now, especially with specific page building applications and CSS frameworks, that it can be, handled quite well, as long as something like WPML is in the background, translating the content.
Yeah. I suspect also that it may be easier if you have, let's say, the multi-site solution, right? Where every single site is its own instance, it's completely differently manageable, and then you have full control again on each of these, right? So,
yeah, even better, but as we talked about a bit the other day too, multi-site won't always work in every situation, particularly when there's concurrent users in two different languages.
Interacting.
Yeah, interacting.
Yeah.
So,
or a cart and et cetera that can be
Right.
complex, having multiple things duplicated.
Yeah, I had a site that was translated into Anishinaabe-Moan, an indigenous language. So the stuff with the screen reader that Megan was talking about in the keynote today, we experienced that. The other thing, though, that we experienced was that Anishinaabe-Moan words are really long. So you end up with like a 30-character word, and that just doesn't fit into a bunch of different places. So we ended up having to adjust to that.
That's a big thing when translating them to French too.
Yeah.
Especially in English, you'll have things like drive through,
Yep.
and they just cut off parts of words and everything, and then the French is like three paragraphs.
It's also the same when you're using Japanese or Chinese. Characters.
Yeah, actually in Japanese and Chinese, because there are no spaces between words, what happens is that the line, it goes to the next line in just absolutely random places, which may look terrible for a native speaker, but they just kind of accept it because they understand how it is. But another thing is that, for example, for hieroglyphic languages, the line height ideally should be different, and the font size ideally should be different. And also sometimes the fonts which are available, you may have, for example, some really beautiful, like weight 1 font, in English,
Right.
but it's not available in for the language like Chinese or Japanese, and it looks just terrible. So I would say it's not so much accessibility issues, but just design issues. And sometimes you need to do some additional adjustments just to make sure that the translated version looks as clean as your native language version.
There are font typesets too for Japanese, which the way that certain characters are written adopts more of a little bit of a Chinese flavor to that, and that would look very strange for somebody reading Japanese. So those things are very specific, yeah.
So what would you want the technical approach of Core Multilingual to look like? This is the third proposed focus for Core after Gutenberg, full site editing, and collaborative editing.
Organized, clean.
The what, sir?
I would want it to be clean and organized.
You want a perfect solution that
I
is
want a
also
perfect
performant
solution.
and solves everything.
Exactly. And
Well,
does
that's
it all
solved then.
automatically? Yeah, that's what I want.
I think this is a very tricky question because I think depending, it's again, depends so much on which use case do you want to solve. And I think potentially for a project like WordPress, it'd be in what order do you want to solve these use cases, right? So is there a plugin that would allow you to simply input the alternative translations for strings of text, no AI stuff?
WPML does that.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Well,
Yeah.
WeGlaw does that.
Yeah. Do either one of you talk a bit about more the interface for WPML, for what it is like for an end user who, or perhaps for a translator, let's say?
Sure, yeah, I can talk about that. WPML handles string translations, and the string translations are strings that are in code, yeah? So your themes or your plugins using __, and you get your strings in that way. And there, it's really just an interface where it's a list of English strings and gives you a way to translate them. The other good thing that WPML does with automatic translations, and they do it in their translation editor, and their translation editor sits on their site, by the way. I don't know if that's relevant or of interest to anybody.
Really?
Yeah, it's not sitting on your WordPress site. It's on...
That must have changed, because back in the day, it was inside
It was
your
inside.
site.
The advanced translation manager it lives on their site. But it gives you, if you have your privacy policy page and it's translated and you go in and you change a word in the third paragraph, it is smart enough to only translate that third paragraph again, so you don't have to pay for it all again. And in the Advanced Translation Manager, you can go in and change the third paragraph because there's a specific translated word that you need, and it will remember that. So it does do that pretty well.
And I also would like to add about WPML. Sometimes you don't want your pages to be identical in two languages. Sometimes you want certain information, even a section in a page, to be completely omitted or be completely different. And for pages like that, for content specifically, we often just use the function in WPML which allows to just link the pages and translate separately, and then we just type, the translation. Of course, it can be automatic translation, but with that allows to achieve precision. But with that, sometimes you will, for example, you update the English page and you forget, to update the Japanese one. So you need some management skills to maintain sites like that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because often, I think in Canada, you will write the French page targeting a different audience than the English page. Right, so you may have a map of Montreal instead of a map of Toronto, or you'll have different things highlighted depending, and different things on the page. So it's not just translating the page element by element, but contextually as a whole. So we have two more questions here. We'll go with one of them that we didn't put in, which are, what are the UX considerations for multilingual content entry in the block editor era? This, I think, is a doozy, and we only have 3 minutes. And everyone's looking at you, Trevor.
Okay. I can speak a little bit to that. And for block authors, when a block gets saved, it's saved in two ways. One is a comment that holds all the attributes that are being passed to the block, and then one is the HTML content of that block. So you may have the same string twice, one in the comment and one in the actual code. And when you're looking for automatic translations, you actually need to tell WPML that this particular attribute on this particular block should be translated. And there's a file that WPML has. It's like a standard that they've created. This, I think it's called WPML.xml. It's a config file that has a couple of other uses. You can say in there, for example, like a custom post type that you're creating should be translatable or not. A taxonomy should be translatable or not. And you can put the information in there about your block attributes. This becomes important, especially important, if your blocks are getting hydrated on the front end, meaning stood up again. Because Gutenberg, like the front end, would be passing in the attributes that are saved, and those would be the English ones, unless you've told WPML to translate them. So you get an entire French page, but you've hydrated this block, and now it's showing English again. That's a gotcha for devs.
I think we're almost done, but there's a couple of questions that I think we can try to do some really quick answers. For this one, for how much does using a translation plugin cost for one website on average? Would that be the same as asking how much does a house cost? In terms of the range, depending on what you need being
Well-
that big, or do you have...
Well, Fluency, $25 flat rate, no limitations on the machine-generated translations.
Google
Currently,
Translate, zero WPML?
G
yeah.
Translate. I think it's $180 a year
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah.
WPML is now what?
79 for a year, I think.
39 for a single
Is
site.
it 39 for a single site?
Is it? Yeah. We got
But-
it so early. So there's the LTDs you keep an eye out for. I don't suppose there's any LTD with.
But I think, so also I think this question kind of misses the translation plugin cost, but the cost of translations on your site can be incredibly high depending on if you have translators, if you have, right? So
Right.
Yeah. So
Usually you also have
we
to-
invested thousands and thousands of dollars into actual human translations in Japan because we needed to get the contextual message across. Our content was very specific, and that was a huge undertaking. And I would say in the tens of thousands of dollars over the years. Yeah.
Yes, but also for AI translation, also I believe you need to pay, for the amount, right? So it really depends on the amount of the
depends, yeah.
content. Yes, so it's
Yeah.
either human or machine translation. There's probably a simple formula, but it really depends on the amount of the content. Yeah.
thank you so much, everyone. The panel will be here tomorrow as well. If you want to go up to them, ask them more questions, I'm sure they'll be glad to answer you. Thank you, everyone, for your questions, and really thank you to our panelists.
And thank you very much, Stefan, for doing such an amazing job as a moderator.
Thank you very much. It was fascinating to listen to. And yes, we live in the World Wide Web, so multilingual sites are becoming increasingly important. So thank you very much for sharing your information today.